The wedding feast by the king for his son. This is a story that could be rooted in everyday's life for us. If we have a friend or a friend of the family, we get invited to the wedding. And I think most of us always look pretty forward to going to such a celebration. So it could be pretty normal. But I think pretty quickly this morning we get the idea that this is no ordinary wedding feast. Actually might strike you as kind of strange and very difficult to understand. Many of the reactions are just very over the top. First, people invited don't come. Then the servants that go out the second time get killed. The king, in his anger, sends his army and burns the city for those that didn't show up. And then we get the hall that's full, and we find one that's not dressed correctly, and he's thrown out into the dark. So why are each one of these so over the top in this story? It's meant to stir our emotions, to wake us up, to shake us up. The king giving the banquet for his son is God the Father, giving it for his son Jesus, whose purpose is to unite the human race with God. We can understand this as a banquet of salvation from our first reading in Isaiah that parallels this gospel. We hear that it's at a mountaintop, very high, a feast of rich food and choice wines, and it will destroy the veil over all people. It will even destroy death forever. So we have the best invitation to the best place, the best food. And what's the response? Who cares? I have things to do. But if you're like me, the first time I read this story, I thought, man, that king is crazy. Boy, it'd be pretty terrible to live in that time. But what really should shake us is how often, like the Pharisees that refused God's invitation to come to his banquet, is that you and I consistently also refuse God's invitation. And then how should we read about God's anger? It is not just God having another simple disappointment in his people, because God's emotions are not like ours. They're not up and down. He is eternal. He is love. We can't think that if we've done something wrong or made God mad, that he is mad with us. No, his desire is always to make things right. And then we have the destruction of the city, which could be the result of Israel's sins. A signal of spiritual destruction that follows them for refusing God's invitation. How can we receive God's invitation? Through the sacraments here at Mass today, through receiving the Eucharist reconciliation, through the church and through its preachings, and through the witness of holy people. We have all received the invitation from our King to the Son's banquet. So what have you and I have done with it? Are we bored? Think we have better things to do? Don't want to be inconvenienced? But the good thing is we know that God is relentless in offering continual grace, always inviting us, no matter how many times we refuse that invitation. But as we hear the story goes with this feast, and the banquet is full, all of us are in his household. Know that we must live in according with his rules of that house. We must dress ourselves appropriately as to live and act in that house. We must wear a wedding garment. Wedding garment standing for our renewals of oneself, as us living as a developed and moral spiritual life. No, without that, we're no different than the ones that refuse that invitation. And then end, we will find ourselves outside in the darkness, wailing and grinding of teeth. So as we go forth, let us wake up. Let this gospel shake us, that we'll always be accepting to God's invitation.